In this video, we're going to talk about complex inheritance. So these are things that traits that aren't really inherited in this simple Mendelian ways that you have probably learned about when we talked about monohybrid crosses or dihybrid crosses. Two examples of complex inheritance include the inheritance of blood type and the inheritance of traits that are caused by genes on the X chromosomes. And we'll talk about both of those. Now, the first thing that we're going to be looking at is blood type. And in order to be able to look at the inheritance of blood type, you need to be able to do a simple monohybrid cross. And if you don't know how to do this, then go back to one of the other videos where I talk about how to do a simple monohybrid cross and how to do dihybrid crosses. If you feel comfortable doing a monohybrid cross, then this will be really easy for you. So let's first talk about blood type. Blood type is known as a form of complex inheritance, which is caused by multiple alleles. So we know that previously when we're talking about simple genetics, there was only two variations of a gene that were possible, a dominant allele or a recessive allele. But there are certain traits that are caused by more than two variations of a gene. So there could be maybe 3 or 4 variations of a gene that are possible or that could exist within the population. And blood type is one of these. Blood type is actually caused by 3 possible alleles. So the possible alleles here are having what I'm going to call an IA allele, IB allele, or an I allele. And you have to remember that what these are representing, these letters, they're representing variations of a gene. And a gene is just a sequence of DNA that codes for a protein. So what this means is that one individual could have this IA gene variation. And what that makes is an A protein. So if this is present in the person, they're going to make an A-type protein. However, if an individual has the IB allele, well, this is going to make a type B protein. And if an individual just has a little I allele, this means that they have a gene sequence that actually has a mutation that doesn't make a protein at all. So this gene is mutated and no protein is made at all by it. So it's pretty much like a silenced gene. Oops. We know that every person has 2 copies of a gene that controls for a trait. So what are all the possible combinations of these 3 different alleles that could exist in individuals? Well, one possible combination is for them to be little I, little I. Well, this individual wouldn't make any proteins. So if you look at their red blood cells, there's actually no proteins coating their red blood cells. So this individual has type O blood. And we know that people with type O blood tend to be called the universal donors. And they're the universal donors because there's no proteins on their blood that would cause somebody who's receiving that blood to their immune system to react to it. Our immune systems react to proteins that we aren't familiar with. And so if anybody can receive type O blood and their body won't react to it because there aren't any proteins for their body to respond to, for their immune system to attack. However, an individual with type A blood, what are their possible allele combinations? Well, one possibility is that they could be IAI. And in this case, the first allele here would cause an A protein to be made, and the second allele wouldn't make any protein. So this individual could only make the A protein, and that would make them type A, and only A proteins would coat their blood. Another possible allele combination that would lead to type A blood would be to be IAIA. Again, an individual that is IAIA would also only be able to make the type A protein. Let's look at individuals that have this B protein. Well, what are their possible genotypes? Well, if an individual was IBI, well, that would create only the B protein again, or IB would create the B protein. So what you could see here is that there's actually more than one allele combination that could create a certain phenotype. What about if an individual has both an IA and an IB allele? Well, an individual like this would be able to make both an A protein and a B protein with both of these gene variations. So this individual would have both of these types of proteins coating their blood, and they would be called an individual that has the phenotype or physical appearance of having AB blood. So how can we solve genetics problems like this? Well, let's look at example 19. It says, if an individual with type A blood, genotype IAI, so this is one of the possible genotypes that could create type A blood. So we are given the information of what their genetic makeup is. They mate with the person with type B blood, IB, little I. What are the possible blood types of their offspring? So if you remember the simple monohybrid crosses we did before, we're going to do the same thing. If you want to make a key here, you can. That is definitely fine. We know IB would mean that they have the B protein. But instead of only having two possible types of alleles, we have three. This is an A protein. And little I is no protein. All right, so what are our parents? Well, one parent is this allele combination. The other parent has these two copies of the gene for blood type A and type B. What are the possible, so this is just like any monohybrid cross. What are the possible gametes this individual could make? Well, they could make a gamete that has the IA allele, or they could make a gamete that has the little I allele. This individual could make a gamete with IB. So remember that when an individual makes their sperm or eggs, each sperm or egg only gets one allele from the two possible alleles that the parent has. So notice each gamete only has one copy of the gene inside of them. So now we want to know the possible fertilization events that could happen if these two parents mated. So we take the gametes from the one individual, put it along the top. Take the gametes from the other individual, put it along the left side here. And then we draw our box. Each allele, or gamete, gets its own column and row. And then we just do what we did before. We're going to just put these letters together. So if this gamete fertilized this gamete, we would get IA, IB. If this one fertilized that one, we would get IB, little I. We would get IA, little I. And in this one, we would get little I, little I. So what are the possible blood types of their offspring? Well, let me change my pen here. So if we look at this first one here, well, the first possible blood type here is AB. Let's look at the second one here. That type of blood, this individual would be type B blood because they could only make a B protein. The little I wouldn't make any protein. If we look at this next possible offspring, well, that would be type A. And then if we look at the last possible offspring right here, well, that would be type O. So we could see that if these two parents mated, the possible blood types of their offspring are actually every single blood type possible. Their offspring could be AB, Could be B, A, or O. Let's do one more example. This isn't an example on your worksheet, but it's always good to just do more practice. So this says, if an individual with type O blood mates with a person with the genotype IB, what is the probability that their child will have type B blood? All right, so let's make a key again. And this, we know IA would make the A protein. We know IB makes the B protein. And if they have the gene little I, that variation, it doesn't make any proteins because it is mutated. What are the parents? Well, the one parent's type O. The only way to be type O would be to have two little i's. So we know that that parent has to be little I, little I. The other parent, they give us their genotype. What is the probability their child will be type IB? Well, let's just figure out. So this individual, what gametes could they make? Well, the only type of gamete they could make is a little I. This individual could only give an IB. It's the only type. Well, let's see what happens if these fertilize each other. Put the one gamete on the top, the other one on the side here. If these two gametes come together, that's what we would get. So what's the probability that they will have a child with type B blood? Well, there's only one type of child that these two parents could make. There's 100% chance that their child would have type B blood. The next form of complex inheritance we're going to look at is understanding X-linked traits. So when we're looking at the genes that make, or the chromosomes that make up a human, humans actually have 46 chromosomes total. We have 23 pairs of chromosomes. And if you look at a female here and a male, these are showing all the chromosomes present in both males and females. You could see that the only difference between a male and a female is this 23rd pair of chromosomes. Females have two X's, whereas a male will have an X and a Y. So typically when we're talking about Mendelian genetics and dominant recessive traits, we're talking about these chromosomes that are not part of the sex chromosomes. So these 22 pairs here are what we call autosomal chromosomes. So these are non-sex chromosomes. So all of these 46 chromosomes are found in every single one of your cells, including what we call the sex chromosomes. The sex chromosomes, the X and the Y, carry genes on them as well, so they also code for traits. But more importantly is this X chromosome. The X chromosome contains a lot of genes on it, and a lot more than the tiny little Y chromosome here. The Y chromosome actually has very, very few genes on it, and it really just controls the male reproductive organs developing as the embryo is developing. So it's this X-linked gene that's really, really important, or X-linked X chromosome that's really, really important. So we can have certain genes that are on the X chromosomes, and because females have two X's and males only have one X, it's going to affect the probability that they will express a certain recessive allele on the X chromosome. And the reason that is let's think about the possibilities here. So X-linked chromosomes will also behave with dominance and recessiveness. There's two possible alleles we could have. We could have a dominant allele, or we could have a recessive X-linked allele. And so these are our two possible variations of the X-linked gene. In females, as females have two X's, there's a couple different possible combinations that they could have. A female could be homozygous dominant for an X-linked trait. They could be heterozygous for an X-linked trait. Or they could be homozygous recessive for an X-linked trait. Whereas a male, he can only have a dominant allele, one dominant allele and one recessive allele because the other chromosome is the Y. So why is this important? Well, let me change my pen color. This is important because notice if a male inherits a recessive X-linked allele or X-linked chromosome here, then he is going to express the recessive allele. There's no dominant allele to mask the recessive allele. So if a male inherits the recessive X-linked allele, he will always express it. Whereas a female, she will only express it if she receives the recessive X-linked allele from both of her parents. If she only receives one recessive X-linked allele, as you can see here in the middle case, well, she would express the dominant allele. She would not express the recessive allele. So females can be heterozygous for X-linked traits, whereas males cannot. So this is going to increase the probability that males will show these characteristics of the recessive X-linked allele. Let's look at an example of what I mean here. So male pattern baldness is an X-linked trait. It is caused by a recessive allele. So let's make our key here. So we can pick any letter we want. It looks like B's are being used, so let's stick with that. So X little b, and it's always important when you're doing an X-linked trait that you draw it as a superscript. Draw your letter really small right above the X there. So this would equal baldness, or being bald. So that means the dominant allele would make the individual normal, having long hair. If a female who's a carrier of the bald allele, so let's draw that down here. This is the female. Notice she has two X chromosomes, and she's heterozygous for this. She mates with a male who is not bald. So he's not bald, so he's going to have the dominant allele, which causes normal hair. So the male is always going to be XY. So the second chromosome needs to be a Y there. What's the probability their son will suffer from complete baldness? Well, to solve this, we just do the same thing as we've done with all the monohybrid crosses. The sex chromosomes also separate just like any other chromosome during gamete formation. So here, this female could give an X with a big B to her offspring. Or she could give an X with a little b. This male, he could give his offspring, or the gamete he could make as an X with a big B, or his offspring could receive a Y chromosome. So you can see it's the male that determines whether you have a male or female child, because he's the one that's either giving a Y or an X to the child. And it should be a 50-50% chance, though, that your child would be male or female, because there's a 50% chance that that the gamete would get an X or a Y. All right, so let's just solve this like before. So we take the gametes possible from the first parent, put it along the top. Take the gametes from the other parent, put it along the side. We do our box. And then we just bring the gametes together. So this would be XB, XB. This one will be X big B, X little b, big B from that parent, a little b from that parent. Now these are females, both females here on the top. Now we're making the males, X big B Y, and then the other possible male would be X little b Y. All right, so let's see what we got here. What's the probability their son will suffer from complete baldness? Well, if we look here, there's two possible sons they could have, right? So the son could get a dominant allele or you could have a recessive allele. So baldness is caused by recessive allele. So this son would be bald. So what's the probability if they have a son that he will be bald? Well, there's two possible things for sons, so it would be 1 out of 2, or 50% chance their son would be bald. What about the female? If we look at the females, is there any possibility the females would be bald? No, because there's no possible way that she would receive 2 recessive alleles. So this is a situation where you could see there's a higher probability for the man or the male to express or show the recessive X-linked allele or trait, and the female would not. There's no possibility their daughter would be colorblind, or not colorblind, bald, but there's a 50% chance their son would be. All right, so that's it for complex inheritance.